Welcome back to Talking Papers Faceless Podcast. I'm Shaquille, and I'm so glad you can join us for another deep dive.
And I'm Akasa, excited to be here.
We're here every Monday and Thursday, bringing you insights from all sorts of fascinating sources. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join the conversation. We always love hearing your thoughts and suggestions for future deep dives, so feel free to leave a comment below.
Okay, so today we're going deep into Edward Snowden's autobiography, Permanent Record. Have you had a chance to read it?
I have, and I have to say, this book really makes you think. You know, it's not just a whistleblower story. It's about technology, privacy, government power. Really gets under your skin.
Absolutely. What really struck me was how much Snowden's early life seemed to, well, foreshadow his path. His dad was a Coast Guard electronics instructor, really instilled in him this passion for mechanics and electronics.
Yeah, that totally comes through in the book. I love that anecdote about him repairing his NES console as a kid. Like, talk about problem-solving skills, right? I mean, do you think that was a sign of things to come, like a little hacker in the making?
It's fascinating to think about, isn't it? That drive to understand how things work, but also push the boundaries a bit. He even mentions struggling in traditional schooling, finding more intellectual stimulation online, almost like the classroom couldn't contain him.
Right. Makes you wonder if that early friction with authority played a role later on, when he challenged the system.
Oh, for sure. And remember, this was a time when the internet was still this wild west, this space full of possibilities. For Snowden, it wasn't just entertainment. It was about exploring, learning, questioning.
And question he did. His career path is pretty interesting, right? He starts as a security guard and then somehow lands a job at the CIA, even without a college degree.
Yeah. Talk about irony, right? He's rising through the ranks of the very institutions he'll later expose. I mean, it says a lot about his abilities, but also about the CIA's need for tech talent, even if it meant overlooking traditional qualifications.
So he dives into this culture of secrecy at the CIA, the contractors, the generational shift within the intelligence community. What were your thoughts on all that?
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? This blurring of lines between the government and private industry. These contractors often had access to incredibly sensitive information, but without the same level of, oversight as actual government employees. Raises questions about accountability, potential for abuse.
For sure. Snowden talks about becoming increasingly aware of government overreach during this time and the moral conflicts he was wrestling with.
Yeah, and don't forget, this is a guy who's deeply patriotic, instilled with a strong sense of duty to the Constitution. You can almost feel the struggle in the book, this tension between his oath of secrecy and what he saw as a duty to the public.
Okay, so let's talk about the surveillance programs he encountered. PRISM, Upstream Collection, Turbine. These were collecting massive amounts of data on citizens, often without their knowledge or consent.
Right, and the justifications were, well, kind of chilling, to be honest. The government was redefining words like acquire and obtain to justify keeping this data indefinitely. It wasn't about targeting specific individuals. It was about getting as much information as possible just in case.
And that's where the concept of metadata becomes so disturbing, right?
Huh.
Even if they weren't reading our emails or listening to our calls, metadata still reveals so much about our lives.
Exactly. Your phone records, location data, it all paints a pretty detailed picture of your habits, your relationships, even your political views. Makes you wonder, was this truly effective in fighting terrorism, or was it more about control?
That's the big question, isn't it? And this brings us to Snowden's decision to become a whistleblower. He meticulously planned his escape, copied thousands of classified documents, risked everything. By the way, if you enjoy deep dives like this, be sure to subscribe, like, and leave a comment. So, what struck you about his motivations?
They were complex, that's for sure. I mean, he wasn't just anti-government, right? He really believed in the Constitution, felt like these programs were betraying what America stood for.
Yeah, that struggle with patriotism really comes through. It's like he's saying true patriotism isn't blind obedience. It's about holding your government accountable.
Exactly. And he put it all on the line for that belief. So let's dive into some of those programs, shall we? Like PRISM, for example. This program basically gave the NSA direct access to data from these huge tech companies, Google, Facebook, Microsoft.
So we're talking about our emails, our chats, photos, browsing history, just handed right over.
That's what the documents alleged. And while some companies have denied it or downplayed their involvement, the evidence suggests they were at least aware of PRISM and, cooperating with the government.
It's kind of disturbing to think about, right? It raises these questions about the role of these tech giants. Are they looking out for their users' privacy, or are they basically tools of the state?
Yeah, that's a debate that's still raging, especially as these companies become even more intertwined with our lives. And PRISM was just the start. Snowden also exposed upstream collection, which was even more invasive.
Right, upstream was about tapping directly into the internet backbone, intercepting data as it flowed through those fiber optic cables. I mean, they weren't even going through the companies anymore. They were just taking everything.
Exactly. It was happening on this massive scale, collecting data from millions of people globally, including Americans, without their knowledge or consent.
He also described this system called Turbine, which was essentially a tool for hacking into people's computers. So it's starting to sound like a sci-fi thriller, right?
It is pretty unsettling. Turbine was designed to exploit vulnerabilities in systems, allowing the NSA to install malware and gain access to all sorts of sensitive data. Really raises concerns about abuse, lack of oversight.
Were there any safeguards in place to prevent this technology from being used against, ordinary citizens?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What Snowden did was force us to confront the fact that these powerful tools existed, but also to question whether there was any real accountability.
And that's what makes his story so compelling, right? He's clearly brilliant, excelling within these systems, but at the same time, becoming more and more horrified by what he sees.
He describes this growing sense of horror, feeling trapped, complicit in something he knew was wrong. It was a real betrayal of his idealism, this belief that technology could be a force for good.
And in the end, he decides to risk it all, to expose everything, believing that the public has a right to know. It's a powerful reminder that even one person can make a difference, even against these huge, powerful institutions.
I totally agree. His actions really sparked a global debate, leading to some reforms, like the USA Freedom Act here in the US. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step towards reining in some of these unchecked surveillance powers.
And it led to legal challenges in other countries too, right? Like in the UK, Germany, trying to force governments to respect people's privacy.
Yeah, and some of those challenges were successful. Some courts actually ruled these programs were unconstitutional, demanding more transparency, stricter safeguards. It shows how legal action and public pressure can work, holding governments accountable to their own laws.
What's so interesting is how Snowden's actions changed the way we think about technology and privacy. Before him, I think a lot of people were just oblivious to how much data was being collected.
He blew the lid off the whole thing. Suddenly, everyone was aware. It forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the digital world and the ways our information could be misused.
And it's led to this whole movement for digital privacy, right? People demanding more control over their data, stronger protections.
For sure, we're seeing more privacy-focused companies popping up, new encryption tools, and just this general increase in awareness around online security. People are starting to take their privacy seriously, and that's a direct result of Snowden's actions.
It's really inspiring to see that kind of impact. But, we can't forget the personal cost to Snowden himself. He gave up his career, his home, basically everything. He's been living in exile for years with a constant threat of extradition.
Yeah, he paid a huge price for speaking truth to power. It's a reminder that whistleblowers face enormous risks. They make huge sacrifices for what they believe in. He acted on his conscience, believing the public had a right to know, and he's still paying the price.
It's a powerful story, one that really resonates with a lot of people, not just those who are super into tech. It taps into this broader concern about government overreach, the erosion of privacy, the importance of standing up and speaking out.
Absolutely. He's become a symbol of resistance, a real inspiration for anyone who believes in holding institutions accountable and defending basic freedoms.
His story, as he tells it in Permanent Record, is both a warning and a call to action. It reminds us that technology can be used for good or bad, and the choices we make today will determine what kind of world we live in tomorrow.
It's about being informed, engaged citizens, demanding transparency and accountability from those in power, whether it's government or corporations. Snowden shows us that even one person can make a difference. One voice can start a movement, and collective action can create real change.
Now, Snowden's book doesn't shy away from the technical stuff. He really gets into the nitty-gritty of how these programs worked, the kind of data they collected, how it was used. It's eye-opening, to say the least.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that makes the book so effective. He doesn't just tell us these programs existed, he shows us how they actually functioned. He also shares these personal anecdotes about his time at the CIA, giving us a glimpse into that culture of secrecy, the reliance on young contractors like himself.
There's that part where he talks about the Frankenstein effect, right? where policies intended to help America end up causing serious harm. It's like a cautionary tale about unintended consequences, especially with technology.
Oh, absolutely. He shows how blindly pursuing security without considering privacy or the rule of law can actually undermine the very freedoms it's supposed to protect. That's a theme that runs through the whole book. Makes you wonder if we're sacrificing our liberty for a false sense of security.
I keep thinking back to that story about the refrigerator he saw at a trade show. He uses it as this symbol of how quickly technology was advancing, often without thinking about the consequences.
Yeah, it's like this ordinary appliance, a refrigerator, but it's connected to the internet, collecting data. It becomes this symbol of how surveillance could just creep into every aspect of our lives without us even realizing it.
It's a powerful image, especially now with smart homes and the Internet of Things. I mean, everything is collecting data on us, from our refrigerators to our doorbells.
It's a reminder to be more aware of the technology we bring into our homes, the choices we make. It's not just about government surveillance anymore. Private companies are in on it too.
And they can use that data in all sorts of ways, from targeted advertising to stuff like predictive policing, which is a whole other can of worms. Snowden's story just underscores how important it is to protect our privacy, not just from the government, but from corporations too.
Absolutely. It's about demanding transparency and accountability from both. But beyond all the technical details, Snowden's book also offers this fascinating glimpse into the world of hacking and cyber warfare.
He talks about his early days as a hacker, not as this malicious activity, but as a way of exploring technology, pushing the boundaries, challenging authority. He describes the thrill of figuring things out, solving the puzzle, finding vulnerabilities.
But he's also aware of the ethical considerations, right? He was always careful not to cause harm, seeing hacking as a tool for good, for exposing injustice, holding the powerful accountable. It's a really nuanced perspective, reminding us that hacking can be used for good or bad.
He even shares stories about using his skills while working for the government, defending against foreign threats, protecting American interests.
It shows that technology and the people who understand it can serve different purposes. The question is, what principles guide those choices? Whose interests are you serving?
It's something we all need to think about as technology keeps evolving at this crazy pace. Snowden's story is complex, and it forces us to move beyond these simple narratives of hero or traitor.
He's a human being who made a difficult choice based on what he believed in. And while his actions sparked a global debate, he's still in exile, unable to go home.
The U.S. government charged him under the Espionage Act, and he could face decades in prison if he ever returns.
It's a tragic situation, really. It highlights the conflict between national security, whistleblowing, and freedom of speech.
He's argued he should be allowed to come back and face trial, but only if he can present a public interest defense, arguing that his actions were justified because he was exposing wrongdoing.
But the government has refused. They insist he plead guilty to espionage. It's a no-win situation, leaving him stuck, unable to clear his name or move on with his life.
It's a reminder that even in a democracy, justice can be complicated, messy even.
And that the fight for freedom and accountability is rarely easy. By the way, if you're enjoying this deep dive into permanent record, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments what other topics or books you'd like us to explore.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about, right? One person's actions creating this ripple effect, changing the world in so many ways. But it wasn't just talk, right? Snowden's revelations led to actual changes in policy, a real shift in public awareness.
Absolutely. I mean, look at the USA Freedom Act, passed in 2015. That was a direct response to all the outrage after Snowden's disclosures. It put limits on the government's ability to collect phone records in bulk. They actually needed a warrant from the FISA court to access specific records.
So it wasn't like a complete overhaul, but it was a step in the right direction. More oversight, more accountability.
Exactly. It showed that lawmakers were paying attention, that public pressure could make a difference. And it wasn't just here in the U.S. Other countries, like the UK and Germany, saw legal challenges against these mass surveillance programs because of what Snowden did.
And some of those were successful, right?
Right.
They actually forced governments to rethink their surveillance powers,
Yeah.
to actually prioritize people's privacy.
Yeah. Some courts actually ruled these programs were unconstitutional. They demanded more transparency, stronger safeguards to protect people's rights. It shows what's possible when you combine legal action with public pressure, holding governments accountable to their own laws.
You know, what I find so fascinating is how Snowden's story really changed the way we all think about technology and privacy. Before all this came out, I think most people just weren't aware of how much data was being collected, like it was happening in the shadows.
He really brought it into the light, didn't he? Suddenly, everyone was aware of what was going on behind the scenes. It made us confront these uncomfortable truths about the digital world and how our personal information could be misused.
And that awareness sparked this whole movement for digital privacy.
Right.
People demanding more control over their data, wanting stronger
For
protections.
sure, you're seeing more and more companies focusing on privacy, offering alternative services. There are new encryption tools being developed all the time, and this general increase in awareness around online security. People are finally starting to take their digital privacy seriously, and I think we have Snowden to thank for that.
It's really incredible to see how much impact he had. But, we can't forget the personal sacrifice he made. He's still living in exile, unable to go home, separated from his family and friends, always looking over his shoulder.
It's a reminder of the risks that whistleblowers take, the sacrifices they make for what they believe in. He acted on his conscience, he felt like the public had a right to know, and he's still paying the price for that.
It's a story that touches so many people, not just those who are into tech. It gets at something deeper, right? This fear of government overreach, the loss of privacy, and the courage it takes to stand up for what you believe in.
I think he's become a symbol of resistance, someone who inspires others to hold institutions accountable, to fight for basic freedoms.
His story, the way he tells it in permanent record, is both a warning and a call to action. It reminds us that technology can be used for good or for bad, and the choices we make today will shape the kind of world we live in tomorrow.
It's about being informed, engaged citizens, and demanding transparency and accountability from those in power, whether it's the government or big corporations. What Snowden did shows us that one person can really make a difference. One voice can start a movement, and that collective action can create real, lasting change.
So if you haven't read Permanent Record yet, I highly recommend it. It's definitely a challenging read, but I think it's essential for anyone who cares about privacy, freedom, and the future of our world, which is increasingly digital.
And remember, this conversation doesn't end here. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep pushing for a better future. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Snowden's story, so leave a comment below and tell us what you think.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Edward Snowden's permanent record. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video for more discussions like this. See you next time on Talking Papers Faceless Podcast.